people decided they were better off without us. They even called us criminals. They tore our family apart. But look around! Someone has to do something! We have to do something! We can make a difference again. The world needs us now, more than ever. Are you with me?
Hero missions are probably one of the things that's the hardest to wrap your head around if you've never played one of them.
The goal around hero missions is for these to be this co-op PvE experience.
I personally only play competitive mode. Like, I'm all about that competition. And I have friends that they don't want to do that at all. So I'm really looking forward to a game that I can play hours and hours with my friends who aren't in competitive, and it's also something that I'm interested in.
Hero missions are the content that people are playing as they are leveling up their heroes. And so for a system like this to really sing, you need a lot of missions. The goal is to make as many as possible, hundreds of hero missions. We've explored a lot of different ways of getting to that much content. Still have like different sets of enemy units that people will be fighting against, and there's different hero mission types. At the same time, hero missions can take place in all of the multiplayer maps that we've done, and we're also adding new spaces onto some of these maps.
With everything we've learned about what it takes to operate this game at the level that you deserve, it's clear that we can't deliver on that original vision for PvE that was shown in 2019. What that means is that we won't be delivering that dedicated hero mode with talent trees, that long-term power progression. Those things just aren't in our plans anymore.
Last week, Blizzard finally launched the first installment of Overwatch 2's long-awaited cooperative PvE story campaign, labeled Overwatch 2 Invasion. I've been playing Overwatch since day one back in 2016, and I loved what Overwatch did with its Archives missions, which was Blizzard's way of testing out the waters in terms of both player perception as well as from their backend, figuring out how to turn a PvP-oriented game into something more. Adding a wealth of new story-driven content that could further broaden Overwatch's horizons not only as a game, but also as an IP. Fueling that ambition while realizing the limitations of the Overwatch 1 engine wouldn't allow them to fully implement their goals, that's where Overwatch 2's developmental story begins. Fast forward through a lot of ups and downs, including the cancellation of skill trees, hero missions, and a ton of other modes and mechanics that would have further fleshed out Overwatch 2's PvE potential. And here we are, having finally gotten our hands on this first story-driven expansion, and now we deal with the number one question at hand being, is it any good? The short answer is yes, at least kind of. I'm the kind of player that honestly believes Overwatch as an IP has enormous potential to blow most other franchises out of the water when it comes to delivering a sizable and meaningful campaign that not only delivers on the spectacle but also gets across some great character interactions, sets up and delivers excellent world building, features invigorating replayable missions, and gives players new challenges and incentives to keep coming back and immersing themselves in what this mode has to offer. Very similar to other games like Destiny 2 offer, except without Bungie's preference for bloated and mangled lore squeezed and squirted out like last drops of ketchup from an otherwise empty bottle, but that's a topic for another day. After much difficulty, I've now played through all 3 of the Invasion missions. I've been experiencing a certain game-breaking issue on the second one that did take me several hours to overcome before I was able to move on to the third and final PvE level, and I'll get to that in a little bit. I did also play through the King's Row Underworld limited time mission. It feels a little weird to keep going back to King's Row. I know this is the second time Blizzard has created a PvE variant of King's Row, and I don't really have a problem with them revisiting older maps and creating fun little side content for players to enjoy. But at this point there are about 30 playable PvP maps in the current game, and that's not including any of the old Overwatch 1 maps that got removed when the developers pivoted to Overwatch 2, such as the 2CP maps like Temple of Anubis. Early pre-release footage of Overwatch 2 has already shown us that they went back and added PvE functionality to most, if not all, of Overwatch 1's maps. So I'm not giving them any brownie points for picking one of the only maps that we've already seen a PvE variant of. I swear to God, if the next seasonal PvE edition is Eichenwald, I'm gonna metaphorically throw my non-existent controller at the screen. Since we're kind of already on the subject, let's just get Underworld out of the way now and then dive into the story missions themselves. Visually, the reskinned King's Row mission is stunning. Say what you will about Blizzard as a company, but the animators, modelers, and lighting designers, and other art department personnel absolutely knock it out of the park every single time they do one of these new map variants. The cinematic presentation of all the set pieces is just fantastic. It makes me genuinely want to see a steady stream of more PvE map reworks as part of the regular seasonal content lineup for all future seasons moving forward, especially considering the next paid expansion has been confirmed to not release until sometime early next year. The actual mission, though, that's a different story. The gameplay, what little enough is there, basically comes across as an awkward combination of what we saw in King's Row Uprising during Overwatch 1's heyday, where you start out defending a stationary point, preventing enemies from destroying it before moving out on the offensive to attack the final checkpoint at the end of the map, seizing it from the robots who get in your way. You have that very obvious inspiration, also combined with literally a spin on Left 4 Dead 1 and 2's level The Sacrifice, where you spend most of your time pouring gas cans into a fuel-powered electric generator. Except here, instead of there being gas cans and a generator, it's electric batteries and a robot regen chamber. Even the layout of the central area surrounding the generator is fairly similar. The problem here is, when comparing Underworld to these other two examples, Underworld doesn't really hold up, and what I mean by that is, at least in the Sacrifice, and to a lesser degree Overwatch 1's Uprising mission, your team has a certain degree of control over how intense and risky things play out, depending on how your team coordinates. Narrow your focus and take out your objectives one by one, or split up and get things done individually. Neither mission necessarily forces you to play one way or the other. However, Underworld has a very stop-and-go flow that results in your team kind of just standing around emoting or taking out a mere handful of individual remaining enemies, while one single person goes out to get the one single battery that spawned in at that time. As the mode is designed with 4 players in mind, it would have been nice if multiple batteries spawned in at a time, that way you could just adjust the arbitrary mission requirements accordingly. It'd be a lot more fun to split up the groups into groups of 2 and 2, with 2 people staying behind to defend the point and 2 other people to go venture out and grab the batteries. Hell, you can spawn in more batteries, like 6 or 8 at a time, and just make it so when enemies spawn in, they go out of their way to try to destroy the batteries to set back your progress. That way, on average, you only manage to salvage a few batteries at a time. But if you're lucky or skilled, you might miraculously be able to salvage a few more batteries at a time. But if you're lucky or skilled, you might miraculously be able to charge up the robot with all the batteries in one single go. I like co-op missions that allow for a multitude of approaches and strategies as opposed to just doing things a certain way because the developer wants you to. Doing the former adds to the replayability factor. Another aspect of the gameplay I don't really care for is how spongy the enemies are. I generally prefer to have more on-screen enemies at a time rather than a concentrated number of enemies, all of which have increased health and damage. That kind of thing should be reserved for bosses and special elite enemy variants. That said, the enemy AI here has definitely gotten a bit smarter, although nothing remarkable. If you try to get in too close and deal a lot of melee damage, like when playing Rhine, they'll swap from their primary fire to instead falling back on a melee attack or some kind of other knockback ability. Conversely, if you stay at range, they'll go out of their way to try to close the distance or spam damage at you from afar. The new PvE only section added to King's Row was cool enough, but it would have been nice if they had added 1 or 2 other set pieces as well. I suppose this being just a free, limited time offering as opposed to a real paid expansion level like those in the Invasion DLC, we probably should expect a somewhat lower production value. I'm not one necessarily for giving out review scores, since I tend to find it just pisses everyone off one way or the other, and the conversation just dissolves into a screaming match, but for the sake of comparing it against the other Invasion levels we'll be discussing here, I'd have to give King's Row Underworld a 5 out of 10. It's neither bad nor good. It just kind of stands out as eh. Even when you compare it to what we got in Overwatch 1's PvE, it's enjoyable enough, and I like what it represents in regards to the potential future of casual PvE content in Overwatch 2, but there's nothing about it that makes me want to replay in the future, unless they add in some more mission modifiers, a new skill tree system, or something else that adds flavor to this very vanilla experience. I will say that having just played the new Death from Above variant of Underworld, it is nice once again to have mission modifiers for Overwatch PvE. Stuff like this is just a tiny glimpse behind the curtain at what Team 4 over at Blizzard probably wanted the Overwatch 2 PvE experience to be like, giving people dozens of unique modes and gameplay modifiers for each map across the whole game, creating unique team compositions and scenarios almost to the point where no 2 PvE encounters would be entirely identical. PvE games have this very unusual problem that on the surface might seem obvious, but for the reasons actually aren't. Specifically, a lot of PvE games and modes tend to feel very samey, like you just rinse and repeat the same handful of modes and enemy engagements over and over and over again, despite the fact that this is also what happens in PvP as well. The main difference is that human players are extremely unpredictable in the sense that you cannot predict with absolute certainty what a human player will do at all times, because humans are not entirely rational beings. Human players will do irrational things for what they think are rational reasons, or might do something for no reason at all, but just a pure instinct. AI is generally designed to be as efficient as possible in completing a very finite goal, or a set of goals, as the case may be. And so unless there's a good reason to do otherwise, they'll just go ahead and tackle that problem head on, without any regard for anything else. For example, when navigating from point A to point B, a player might take an alternate route that is 2.5 seconds longer, and thereby technically less efficient. But the player will commit to that because that path might allow for an alternate flank route that the enemy isn't currently focused on. Or maybe it might lead them towards taking the high ground behind said enemy and getting a couple kills off. The player does stuff like this knowing that it's less efficient in the moment, but instead may yield a longer-term payoff. This requires map knowledge, tactics, and risk-reward analysis in particular. If an AI isn't willing to risk making a few seeming mistakes in order to win, it won't be very interesting to fight against. The AI here is not that smart. It's nowhere near in the same league as something like the Xenomorph from Alien Isolation, and nor do I really expect it to be, at least not the common guys. But I wouldn't mind the PvE bosses and elite enemies being just a bit smarter. There is already a glimmer of that here. If you close in on one of the tougher enemies, they'll smack you back or deal a powerful close-range melee or AoE blow, whereas if you're far away, they'll try to close the distance, like I've said before. My point here is that if Blizzard were to completely rewrite the AI of the tougher enemies to be way more varied, as opposed to merely relying on the same handful of basic moves and strategies, PvE would be far more viable in the years to come. PvE should not be viewed as this merely repetitive, unimaginative experience that is only fun the first time you play it, and then you never play it again. It should draw you in. There should be incentive to grind, but no pressure to do so. This appears to be the direction they were thinking based on earlier footage. And while I know as of this Invasion update, Overwatch 2 is technically no longer an early access game, if we treat PvE itself specifically as being in early access mode right now in terms of how we think of it versus what it could become, and with the right support from both the community and Blizzard itself, it has a shot at being something that could raise the bar for many other AAA studios as well in terms of how they invest in their PvE experiences. The first game had a couple of interesting ones for the Overwatch Archives levels, even though the AI and overall PvE quality was far more bare bones. And then also you have the modifiers for Junkenstein's Revenge, some of which still exist in Overwatch 2. I'm not a huge fan of them rolling these out on a weekly basis. I get what Blizzard's doing, giving players a reason to keep logging in each week for PvE, just like the incentives they already have for PvP. What I worry about is that while we have a few more weekly modifiers coming down the pipeline, and I love that you can still play prior ones from prior weeks, not just the newest one, what happens when this limited time King's Row mission goes away? So yeah, as far as Underworld is concerned, I default to Overwatch 1's slogan of, I don't just see it how it is, but rather as it could be. Now, moving on to the story missions. We certainly have a lot to cover here. First up, of course, we have the first mission, Resistance, taking place on the Rio de Janeiro map. The mission starts out in what would normally be the final payload checkpoint on the original PvP version of the map. The spawn room appears to be completely new, which is a cool touch, but this early part of the map plays out almost identically to the PvP version, save for the fact that there's a lot of new rubble and clutter laying around, most of which provides for excellent cover, especially if you're playing on one of the harder difficulties, which I definitely recommend. That's another thing I probably should point out before we go any further. If you're playing these new story missions for the first time, I definitely recommend starting on at least hard difficulty and working your way up from there. Normal is way too easy. Unless you're at the bottom of the competitive ladder like bronze or silver, you'll breeze right through the missions. And maybe if you're just looking for the story and not any actual gameplay, that's fine. But if you're like me and you'd like to play with a little bit of an edge, just the tiniest hint of an uphill battle, hard difficulty is perfect to start out with. Legendary tends to be a bit grindy. You can make it work. I definitely made it work in the past, and as far as skill goes, I'd say I'm about average, ranging from high gold to low plat depending on which class I'm playing. I tend to be better as a tank, but I was able to beat Resistance on Legendary, but only after a single game over and after me and my team spent most of the second attempt taking turns reviving each other while still holding our own against the encroaching enemies. Resistance was definitely my favorite of the three story missions. The scripted destructibility of the map, the pacing, and especially the transition from ground to sky midway through when you have to go up into the Omnic ship, it's great. The cutscenes that bookend the beginning and middle of each level are fantastic, as are the shorter mini cutscenes that introduce certain bosses and elite enemy types. I and my team had a blast with the final boss fight at the end. It really pushed us to work together and coordinate our ultimates, our cooldowns, and our positioning. The only two obvious downsides off the top of my head in this map was that, firstly, the enemy AI was kind of dumb in some aspects. When we were playing on Legendary, my team had entered into the scripted fight against a room full of enemies, and we were getting our asses kicked left, right, and center, which is good. That's kind of how I want it. However, we accidentally stumbled across this nifty little exploit where the robots would just stand there where they had spawned in, shooting at us as we poked our heads out, but wouldn't take a single step forward. It just patiently waited for us to emerge, save for one tankier enemy that was bombarding our corner with missiles, although he as well never really actually moved forward around the corner to finish us off, preferring instead to blast away at the wall we were all hidden behind. So yeah, I just want to see this. As soon as we turn the corner, they stopped shooting.
Okay, wait, so let's get Echo up, and then heal, and then I will speed boost us in, and then I will beat.
You know, you're right, they just stand there.
Yeah.
I didn't believe you at first, but yeah, I'm just standing here and they're just... I would have thought they'd move in. There was also a second bug we found in the very same room, where if you try to double back through the door you initially walked through, within the first minute or so of you being in said room, you'll step outside of the intended play area and your screen will go black and the game will simply respawn you inside of the new room and close the door behind you. I'm pretty sure it was supposed to close in the first place and we just hopped back inside before it did. There are a lot of these small minor bugs. And were it only one or two things, I probably wouldn't even be making an issue of it, but there are a lot of other weird ones as well. The technical quality of these levels itself is not that high. And what I mean by that is, like, sometimes the robots don't spawn in normally with their typical drop pod animation, or their alternate animation of basically teleporting in and out with a Star Trek-like shimmer. And instead they bug out, kind of just appearing out of thin air and dropping to the ground with no animation to excuse it. Whenever the game gives you the objective of opening a certain door in order to progress, such as when you're leaving spawn or pushing forward into a new area, there's a long delay between when the objective first appears on your screen and when you're actually allowed to open the door. I didn't exactly pull out my stopwatch to get an exact count, but the delay seems to be about 10 seconds. And I'll tell you right now, you're never going to realistically run into a scenario where the time between getting the objective of opening a door and actually reaching the door itself takes up even half of that time. And almost every single time I got that objective to open the door, my team and I were already standing at said door, spamming sprays over and punching idly. Considering that this particular level had been 100% completed in terms of both gameplay content and its in-game cutscenes since at least 2019, if not earlier, and Blizzard has had the last almost 4 years to do nothing but polish it and the other two levels we have here, it's a bit disheartening that issues like this nevertheless made it across the finish line. Still, Resistance takes the top spot as being the best PvE level we got in this expansion. It only goes downhill from here, take my word on that. I'm giving Resistance a 8 out of 10. Alright, next up at bat we have Liberation, taking place on what would normally be the PvP push map Toronto. I love what they've done with this map. As far as I can tell, pretty much every single set piece and location appears to be entirely new. You can definitely tell they borrowed more than a few assets from the existing PvP version, but unless you're really detail-oriented, you're probably not going to notice. I really liked how they handled the layout of the level. Every single section of it flows differently than the rest. Unlike Resistance, you genuinely get the feeling that the team over at Blizzard designed this level from the ground up exclusively with PvE in mind, rather than simply keep the PvP level as is and add one or two new zones on top of it, as they did with the Omnic ship and Resistance. Level design-wise, this is top-tier PvE content, exactly what I want to see Blizzard churning out with each and every single future PvE expansion. I especially enjoyed the massive sprawling underground section where it's all multi-leveled, and you have to parkour your way across empty air in certain spaces to find a lever or activate a bridge for the rest of your team to cross, and the friendly NPCs you're guarding. The final stretch of the level was likewise breathtaking as you run in a straight line through the wind and everything starts blowing in your face through the otherwise empty streets until enemy Omnics start closing on you on all sides and you make your way through a park to get to the landing zone. The passion and talent of the developers just oozes through in almost every single way here in terms of the visuals and gameplay. It is amazing. That said, there are a few things I wasn't so thrilled with. Like, for one, and I don't know if this is just me, but I just couldn't bring myself to really care about the story in this level. I'm sorry, I don't give a shit. The Overwatch marketing team went out of their way to hype up this grand mystery surrounding why these floating ball robots are floating around the city, sucking the life out of ordinary Omnics and dumping their bodies all over the city. They're basically Robo-Dementors from Harry Potter, if you want to think about it that way. It's an interesting concept, and the level does absolutely nothing with it. There are moments where the game obviously wants you to feel sad or express sympathy for what's going on, but I just don't feel like I've had enough investment up to this point to give a shit one way or the other. I'm sorry, I don't. Having replayed the mission many more times than the other two, I almost feel as if with some of these set pieces where you see these rooms full of dead or comatose Omnics all piled on top of each other or spread across the room in mass graves. This level would have worked better if it had been more horror-themed. I know Overwatch as an IP is rated teen, so there are certain ratings-related limitations as far as what they could get away with showing. But had they shown these Omnics disposed of in more inhuman callousness, it implied a lot more than just, oh, they're taking a group nap together, oh, look at this little preschool assembly all just laying around, oh, how sad. Why should I feel sad? This is the same shit I see 5-year-olds do in Sunday school. Like, what's the big deal here? If we had spent a little bit more time with Omnics before seeing them like this, like if we had seen them walking, talking, expressing vulnerabilities like everyone else, I would have felt more, I think, when I saw this. But that's not what we got, and that's not how I feel. If it wasn't for the mission itself telling me to protect certain Omnics, I'd be entirely indifferent to them living or dying, and maybe that says more about me than it does most players, but I don't give a shit. The stakes just didn't feel anywhere near as high as those in Resistance. There was no final boss, no meaningful escalation of difficulty near the end. It just kind of ended almost randomly, as if the developers couldn't be bothered to think of a clean way to wrap everything up. To wrap a neat bow on it, this mission was flat out broken on day one. There's this section early in the level where you have to guard a specific stationary objective, the ship on the edge of the water, as citizens intermittently run out in small groups in between every enemy wave. You have to successfully guard 3 consecutive groups of civilians, and then you win, and then you move on to the next objective. However, and this is a big however, the enemies will try to damage the ship by sending out these little laser beam emitting robot dogs called slicers as part of the typical enemy wave. These guys run very fast, and due to their decreased size, they're quite difficult to shoot at times. And they do a lot of steady damage to the objective, so you have to kill them quick before they get a chance to get started. The problem is that for some asinine reason, if the slicers get past you, they'll glitch their way into the ship itself, through a literal physical wall, making it impossible for you to actually do any damage to them, creating a guaranteed insta-fail game over. I got some footage from either the second or third consecutive time this happened to me, I don't remember. It's so fucking dumb. It is so dumb. Just take a look.
What was that? Are we hit?
They scratched the hull. We'll hold them off. I promise. They're damaging the ferry. Once the ferry's clear, I'm heading into the city to look for other survivors. You with me? Of course.
Be careful! They have fielded heavy resistance!
Artillery barrage coming in!
Watch out for the enemy!
There were other bugs as well, but I've never seen anything anywhere near that awful. It makes me wonder whether Blizzard ever bothered to playtest this, even though obviously I know they had to have done. I just have to wonder how something like this ever made it past QA. Overall, I'd have to give Liberation a 5 out of 10. If it were merely the level design alone, I'd want to give it a 9 or a 10 easily, but just given how the story here drags, the lack of challenge in certain aspects, the game-breaking bugs, it just doesn't hold up under close examination. Would I replay it, especially if Blizzard went back and created new mission modifiers or other replay incentives? Absolutely, but not until they fix some of these fundamental quality of life issues. The third mission, Ironclad, set in the as of yet unreleased Gothenburg map, as in Blizzard hasn't yet ported it over to PvP because it was originally designed with 2CP in mind, a game mode that thankfully went the way of the dodo bird with the shuttering down of Overwatch 1. There isn't really all that much in terms of storytelling to be found here. The premise is pretty simple. Torbjorn and Bastion are now working together for reasons best left unknown, I guess, because the development team didn't bother to actually do anything with that. Reinhardt's not a big fan of Bastion existing because there's this long history of fighting Bastion units during the original Omnic Crisis, and Reinhardt wants Torbjorn to rejoin Overwatch as they once again take the fight to the Omnics, which Bastion is one of, I guess. It's a lot of interesting setup, and it implies a lot of existing history that the game doesn't really do anything with in the cutscenes that we get. Yeah, I have very mixed feelings about the cutscenes. It feels like this is taken from the end of the early part of the game, if that makes sense. Like, it feels like there are other levels that set up some of what we're seeing here in these cutscenes, but were just omitted from the first expansion. Probably because the state of Overwatch 2's PvE story missions is just really, really bad, and these were just the levels that Blizzard had most ready. So they just threw it together without really thinking of how well they work together in synergy. Setting aside the story issues, Gothenburg is absolutely beautiful. There is so much vivid detail to be found here, and the objectives are really fun and varied. You never feel like you're just repeating the same sequence. Unlike Retribution, this isn't a door opening simulator. Here, one moment you're guarding a payload, this mini floating train through the map, which gradually becomes smaller and smaller as individual components of the train break off one by one to deliver power batteries automatically at certain scripted checkpoints, which activate these giant guns which will steadily deal damage to overhead Omnic ships, as well as this giant Pacific Rim looking motherfucker staring you down across the map as it stands in the ocean, marching its way towards you. Then you have to defend Torbjorn's workshop using a variety of new experimental turret guns, all of which have different properties, like one that boops enemies back like Lucio would, another that freezes and slows enemies like May would, and you even get to move these turrets wherever you want. The game will show you outlines of recommended turret gun placement, spots that it wants you to put them, where you should probably put a few turrets, but you're completely free to ignore that and place them pretty much wherever you want. I bitched a lot earlier about how King's Row Underworld wouldn't really let you play however you wanted to, but confined you to a specific playstyle at all times. Ironclad is what I want to see more of. It does the exact opposite and gives you that much needed flexibility, and so credit where credit's due. I love the gameplay here. This should be, in some respects, the new gold standard for Overwatch 2 PvE. Ironclad was also the only level out of the 3 story missions that played out as intended. No noticeable bugs or issues. For the most part, it felt pretty fairly balanced. No major complaints there. It was fine. Of all the levels currently accessible in the game, this would be the one I'd be most inclined to replay. The only downside I noticed is that, while I did enjoy the giant mecha boss fight, the indirect nature of it wasn't exactly my cup of tea. I prefer to shoot and brawl with my bosses up close and personal. I'm not saying what we got was bad, it's not, I'm really not saying that, but it just wasn't to my liking subjectively as a player, and for that I'd have to give Ironclad a 9 out of 10. Before we move on, because there are still a few other non-PvE things I want to critique, I do want to mention one bit of recurring feedback I've seen from other players and larger content creators, which I 100% agree with, being the go-go-go nature of these levels and their lack of lore and world building. I'm not just talking about the cutscenes, which are fine, we're just talking about within the actual gameplay. The levels contain a few fun collectible Easter eggs which do let you complete a few achievements, but the developers definitely missed an opportunity to do something more. In many of Overwatch's existing PvP levels, you can find scraps of lore that hint at certain characters, factions, locations, etc. Blizzard has even incorporated in-game lore before as part of upcoming hero reveals, like the ARG that led up to Sombra's reveal in Overwatch 1. Basically, what I think a lot of other people are asking for is the occasional side room or hallway off the main scripted path. Not everything has to serve the main mission objective. Reward players for completely optional exploration that doesn't get in the way of the main objective at hand. Once again, I'm going to drag out Destiny 2's Carcass as an example. There are entire YouTube channels dedicated to providing videos delving into every bit of obscure Destiny lore, almost all of which can be found directly in the game itself by exploring stuff off the beaten path. I worry that the excessive focus on linear layouts with no multiple flank routes, collectible lore, hidden rooms, or other interesting bits and bobs will negatively impact the player count not only for this expansion and the levels within, but for future expansions and levels as well. Also unrelated, but one very minor quality of life thing I'd love to see Blizzard address in the short term is that, unlike quick play competitive or arcade game modes, if you queue up for a PvE mission, you're not given the option to jump into the training range, custom games, or anything else. The whole while you wait menu doesn't show up for missions, and I have no idea why, since the time to get into a PvE match is more or less equivalent to finding a competitive match, as in it can take anywhere, in my experience, from 30 seconds to 3 minutes, and I can almost guarantee you that on average the number will only continue to increase, not decrease. Speaking of the training range, Blizzard finally went back in and reworked the entire thing, making a number of nifty changes and additions. I'm not sure I found every single one, but just a few that stick out include the all-new shooting range minigame, which you can find tucked away in the far corner, as well as these batteries that'll instantly charge up your ultimate ability to 100, allowing you to quickly test them out without the need to manually charge it up slowly by shooting practice dummies. You can now swap out enemy bots into a few different variations, including one that has a Reinhardt shield, another that rapidly shoots high-powered rockets like Farah. It gives players more of a reason to check out the training ranges, especially if you're trying to test out a new or unfamiliar hero. Speaking of new and unfamiliar heroes, I did spend a bit of time playing as the new support hero, Ilara. The playstyle doesn't quite gel with me, as her kit, kind of like Zenyatta's, almost exclusively incentivizes a aggressive combative playstyle. Healing is almost a secondary consideration. Your ultimate ability literally just turns you into a knockoff Farah, equipping you with a rocket launcher and allowing you to fly up and around in the air. The healing beam you shoot out with your secondary fire functions very similarly to Zarya's beam, in that it's a straight horizontal beam, albeit one that heals anyone in its very narrow range as opposed to Zarya's, which obviously does damage instead. The healing turrets you can provide very similarly to Symmetra's damage turrets provide some direct healing for individual heroes at a fairly decent rate, especially if you place it on a wall or ceiling outside of the enemy's line of sight, but also where it can reach multiple teammates. Similar to Baptiste's immunity field, you'll also have to quickly learn how to play around it and coordinate that with your team. I don't have all that much to say about the new PvP mode Flashpoint since I've only played 3 complete matches, and 1 partial one, 2 being on the new Suravasa map and the 3rd one being on New Junk City. Of the 2, I preferred New Junk City personally. As far as the mode itself, the matches do tend to go by a little quickly compared to Payload, Push, or King of the Hill, so maybe they need to slightly tweak the capture speed of each point or increase the required point total to 5 instead of 3. Other than that, it's fine. I'm not really a fan of it per se, but I can live with it. The distances between each point are massive, to the point where you always seem to be spending more time running from point to point to point, rather than securing each said point. Maps like these might make for amazing PvE experiences, but as PvP maps, I gotta be honest, they kinda suck. And I hate to say that because the art department, they've knocked it out of the park with all the amazing detail they put into both of these maps. Again, in terms of detail and art design, New Junk City is probably one of my top tier maps outside of Eichenwald. The flow of the mode just doesn't do a good job of letting these maps stand out as not just being different from the others, but also equal to them. Being different is not inherently a virtue in cases like this. Flashpoint doesn't feel like the kind of mode that belongs in competitive, so I don't really know why they shoved it in there. It's too gimmicky and arcadey. I much prefer it as a quick play only mode or tossed into the arcade menu as one of the daily recurring modes. It just doesn't have the feel of something that belongs in a competitive setting. I wish I could describe exactly why, but I feel like there's a missing X factor I can't quite puzzle out. I'm not going to talk about the Battle Pass because, at this point, what do you want me to say? It does basically what every other Overwatch 2 Battle Pass has done. There's 7 new character skins, 1 every 10 levels, some new sprays and emotes, a few character voice lines, some coins that you can spend on stuff, and that's about it. It's almost laughable how unremarkable the Overwatch 2 Battle Passes are. I'll probably end up completing it like I've done for most of the prior Battle Passes because, despite my continual ongoing love-hate relationship for all things Overwatch related, it's still one of my go-to games whenever I'm looking to kill some time, and despite the almost unforgivable mess that Blizzard's made out of this supposed sequel, I still want to believe that there's a chance at a brighter future under the upcoming change of management brought on by Microsoft's acquisition of the studio. Given these spectacular changes and comeback stories of some of their other live service games like Sea of Thieves, I'm hoping that the best days still lie ahead for Overwatch 2, for both its PvP and PvE offerings. That said, that's where I'm going to wrap it up for today. If you want to check out some more of my game reviews in the future, you know what to do. Subscribing, checking the box to enable notifications. All of it obviously helps. I do this for fun, I don't really make any money doing so, and I don't speak for anyone but myself. These opinions are entirely my own, and I'm sure you have yours as well. Let me know how you feel about Overwatch 2 Invasion in the comments section down below. This is Warrior Dan signing out. Stay awesome, and peace out.